Why are these orphans rejoicing? Because gifts to the Dorms for Orphanages Fund of Heaven's Family have provided them with new homes. Okay, welcome back. We are now just launching off into Matthew chapter 18. And I really like this whole chapter. There's so much information. It's going to take us a while to get all the way through Matthew 18. But it begins with a very interesting story. Let's just read one verse. Matthew 18, verse number 1. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and said, quote, "Who then is greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" And they were not asking out of pure academic interest, let me tell you. We know that from other scriptures. As I tried to point out to you, it's so worthwhile to look at the other gospel writers who include the identical stories to see if you can glean some more insight into this. And if we only had Matthew's gospel, we really wouldn't know all that's going on behind the scenes. That's why we had the benefit of Mark and Luke in this case, okay? So let's take a look at what Mark tells us about this story. This is in verse number 33 of Mark chapter 9. And this is the identical setting. You could research it for yourself, Mount of Transfiguration, casting out the demon of the epileptic boy and so forth. So it all fits in there. So Mark 9, verse 33, they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he began to question them, "What were you discussing on the way?" But they kept silent, for on the way they had discussed with one another which of them was the greatest. I can hardly believe we're reading this, that they were actually doing this. These grown men who had been with Jesus for almost 3 years now and know that the end is near. Jesus has at least twice told them they're going to go to Jerusalem. He's going to suffer. He's going to be killed there. They're making assumptions that his kingdom is going to, start very soon. And they're questioning, they're debating on one another, who's the greatest among us? Okay? Luke gives us a little insight there, and it's even more interesting, I think, than what either Matthew or Mark tell us. Again, same context, same setting, but this is Luke 9, verse 46. An argument started among them as to which of them might be the greatest. But Jesus, knowing what they were thinking in their heart, et cetera, et cetera. So it wasn't just a discussion about which one might be the greatest. It wasn't just an academic question. Well, who then is the greatest? No. They all had something personally, a personal agenda. They were hoping to be the greatest. You may remember there's another story in the Gospels of when James and John, and apparently their mother was involved, coming to Jesus requesting that in his kingdom that they would be seated at his right and his left hand. See, they were vying for the positions in what they thought was the soon coming kingdom, this miracle working Messiah whom we know is the Son of God. I mean, he's told us these things about him dying and so forth, but that doesn't make any sense to us. We expect the Messiah, if he's going to Jerusalem, he's going to start his rulership there. And so let's put ourselves in a position to make sure, we stand the most to gain. We read in that same story when James and John requested to be seated at Jesus' right and left hand, that the other disciples resented it. Okay, so, it seems like Jesus' church has never lacked people who are vying for the top slots. And if we look at this honestly, let's just call a spade, people who want to be at the top, and sit at the right and left hand and so forth, and who want to be the greatest, that's nothing more than just pure selfishness, right? Pure self-interest. And I just can't imagine that Jesus wasn't inwardly disappointed in the fact that his key men, the most spiritual people that he has to work with at this point in time, handpicked, by the leading of the Holy Spirit at this point, after observing him and listening to him, are arguing over who's the greatest and wanting positions of authority in his coming kingdom. So he says, I had better make my point. And he makes his point. Let's go back now to Matthew and verse number 18 and verse 2, chapter 18, verse number 2. And he called a child to himself and set him before them. And he said, truly, I say to you, unless you are converted and become like children, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. So he's not avoiding their question as to who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, but he's leading up to that, because if you're going to be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, you need to make sure you get into the kingdom of heaven first. That's paramount, all right? Get in, and then we'll worry about any titles and positions and greatness. So first thing, make sure that you get into heaven, and he calls this child. And he says, you've got to be converted and become like children, or else you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. So this is key. This is a salvation verse, isn't it? We need to stop here, pause for a little bit, and think about what Jesus could possibly mean, because he's telling us how to enter God's kingdom. And it has something to do with becoming like children. Well, he doesn't mean that you should become childish, obviously. The other scriptures tell us that foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child, and the rod will drive it far from him. And Paul admonishes us to, put away childish things. And children are generally, they are self-centered, okay? We know that they're innocent, but still, what are the exact characteristics? What is Jesus trying to say here? I have taught on this numerous times over the years that I've been teaching and so forth. And oftentimes, if I'm teaching at a church and I'm on these verses, I'll just pick a child out from the congregation and pull that child up and say, come on up here. I just want to use you just as Jesus used a child, as an example of a person who's going to heaven. And inevitably, that child always kind of is very timid and shy. It shows a degree of humility. And I think perhaps that's part of what Jesus was saying. We need to humble ourselves. God resists the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. Okay? Much more. I think Jesus is saying, and we'll get into it next time. Look forward to that. See you then.
HeavenWord 7 is made possible by the financial support of viewers like you. Thank you.